The first thing that we're going to do is create a cylinder. The reason for this is because a cylinder closely resembles the basic shape of our lamp. So to make modeling easier, we're going to start with a cylinder. So let's add the cylinder. Hit Shift A, Mesh, Cylinder. When you're creating a primitive, you have a pop-up dialog box here that lets you be able to increase the number of segments to your primitive. So right now I'm saying that this face is about this thick. I'm going to use that face layer, so I want to make it thinner. The way for me to do that is to increase the number of vertices until it's about the size that I want. Something around 44 will do. Now click outside the object. Select the cylinder again and go to Edit Mode. Now I'm going to start adding loop cuts to it so that I can delete faces where I don't want it. I'm going to go to the loop cut tool and click and drag to where I want to make the cut. Same thing for the bottom part. Now I don't want these faces at the top here. So I'm going to select those faces, go to Face Mode, select, Shift to add to the selection, and press X and delete faces. That should leave it open. Now I need another loop here so that I can delete the ones that are in between. So I'm going to go ahead and create another edge loop, and then I'm going to bevel that out. Press Ctrl B and create about the same size as the areas that are at the top and at the bottom. So now I'm just going to rotate everything just a little bit so that this face is in the middle here in the axis. So I'm going to press A, press R to rotate, and then Z to constrain the rotation in the Z axis. And I'm going to try to make it right in the middle there. This is just so I know which ones to not delete and which ones to delete. I want to keep the four corners to not be deleted. Alright, so now I'm going to go to Face Mode, and I'm going to start selecting the faces that I don't need. Click on a face and hold Shift and click on another one to add to your selection. Or you can hold Control, Shift, and click on the end face to create a series of selections. I'm going to skip this face right here because I'm going to need it. I'm going to Shift click this one and then Control Shift click here to create another series of selections. I'm going to do the same here. Shift click, Control Shift click, Shift click, Control Shift click. Now I made a mistake here because I am supposed to not select this one and select this one instead. So I'm going to Shift to select this one and then Control to deselect this one. Now something went wrong there, and I'm just going to select this one again. And now we have the proper faces selected. I'm going to do the same for the bottom part here. Shift click and then Control Shift click. Shift click and then Control Shift click. Shift click, Control Shift. Now that we've selected the faces that we don't need, press X and select faces. This will only leave the areas that we need for the frame. Now go out of Edit Mode by pressing Tab, and we're going to go ahead to our Modifiers tab here, and then click Add a Modifier. I'm going to add a Solidify modifier. What this modifier will do is it lets you add a thickness to your mesh. If you increase the thickness here, you can increase the thickness depending on where the surface is facing. It can either go in or go out. If I decrease the thickness, it will go the other way. think I'm going to keep it going down. All right. The next thing that we're going to do is add a subdivision surface modifier to it. This will let me add more geometry to my mesh and smooths it out so that I have a better looking object. Click Add Modifier and then select Subdivision Surface. Now something went wrong here. Since we don't have a lot of geometry around these area, it will try to smooth it out, which will give us this kind of rounded area right here, which we don't need. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn this off and go back to edit mode. Press tab and add supporting edge loops to the areas where I wanted to keep its shape. So I'm going to go to Loop Cut tool, add a loop cut right here. Also on the other side, right here, right here, also right here. Same thing for the other side here. And in this area. This will ensure that our object has enough geometry around this area to tell the subdivision surface modifier to keep its shape. So if I go back to object mode, go back to solidify, and turn on subdivision, you will notice that it is now keeping its shape. So I'm going to do the same for the other parts here. Now these areas look rounder, so I'm going to add more edge loops to it to keep its shape. Alright, that's pretty good. So now here we can still see banding on the faces. It's not very smooth. So we're going to go right click our object and shade smooth. There you go. Now that we have our frame created, we can now go ahead and use a lattice modifier to shape our frame. Create a lattice modifier by hitting Shift A and click lattice. Go to the x-axis and scale it up so that it encompasses the entire cylinder. Now I noticed that our frame is a little bit too wide. So I'm going to go ahead and scale it down in the X and the Y axes. So I select the frame, press S, and then Shift Z so that it will only scale on the sides, like so. And I'm also going to go ahead and do the same thing for the lattice. S, Shift Z. Now I want this lattice to deform this frame that we have, but it can't deform it if it doesn't have any points that we can move around. So I'm going to add more points to it. Select the lattice, go to the object properties, and then increase the W resolution. Change this to about 5. That way we have 3 loops here that we can use to change the shape of our frame. Now let's go back and click on our cylinder. Let's add a lattice modifier. Go down the modifier stack to find your lattice modifier, and then in Object, click the eyedropper tool, and then click on your lattice. Now it is using this lattice to deform this object. If we go to our lattice, let's go to the side view here, and press Tab to edit our lattice. If we select these points over here and scale them out, you will notice that it is now deforming our frame. So now it's time to do some shaping. Scale these ones at the top, and this one's near the bottom out. Now that we have the shape that we want, notice that our frame is not very smooth around these areas. This is because we are working with a lower polygon count. To increase the amount of polygons on our frame, we just need to go to our modifiers and increase the subdivisions. And now we have a much smoother frame. I also notice that our frame is too thin. So we're going to have to increase the thickness of our solidify modifier. Now let's create a cylinder for our glass. I'm going to scale it down a little bit and then go to Edit Mode and select the top face and the bottom face so that I can delete them. Select the remaining faces and press S Shift Z to scale it down on the sides to fit the frame just a little bit better. Next, I'm going to adjust the vertices at the bottom and at the top to align to our frame much better. I'm going to go to Edit Mode, go to Side View, and then enable X-ray vision so that I can select the vertices at the front and at the back, and then move them to where I want them to be. In order for us to deform our cylinder just like our frame, we need to subdivide it along the height so that we can have enough polygons for our deformation. For this, I'm going to use the Loop Cut tool. Increase the number of cuts until you have faces that look like squares. Now we can apply modifiers the same way we did for our frame. But there's an easier way to copy modifiers from one object to another. To do that, simply select the object that you want to apply the modifiers to, and then select the object that you want to copy the modifiers from. And then go to Object, Link Transfer Data, and then Copy Modifiers. This will apply all of the modifiers and its settings to the new object. Now let's adjust the height of our glass to fit the frame. Turn off the visibility of our modifiers and then go back to Edit Mode. Select all the faces, go to Side View, and then just scale it and move it along the Z-axis. Turn on the modifiers again so that you can see if it fits. For our glass, we don't need as many subdivisions as our frame, so I'm going to lower it down to 1 and then right click and shade smooth so that I don't see the faces. You can also see that the edges of our glass are too rounded, so I'm going to make it a little bit sharper. To do that, I'm going to go back to Edit Mode and use the Loop Cut tool to add edge loops to those areas. To create the base for our lamp, I'm also going to use a cylinder and scale it down to the size that I need. Select the top face, then press E to extrude, and then S to scale down. This will create an inset. Select the bottom edge loop, and then press EZ to extrude it down, and then scale it. From this point on, I'm only going to be using extrude, scaling, and moving edges and faces. So I'm just going to go over this really quickly. Notice that if you try to bevel this edge loop, you get this weird kind of result. This is because our cylinder has scaling applied in the Z-axis. To fix this, go back to Object Mode, press Ctrl A and then scale to apply the scaling that we did to our cylinder. Now if we bevel that edge loop again, it should work correctly. Now I'm just going to bevel the rest of the edge loops that I need to. To create the top portion of the lamp, I'm going to do the same thing that I did at the bottom and use a cylinder.
I'm still going to be using extrusion, scaling, and moving edges and faces to shape the cylinder the way I want. To turn an n-gon into quads, select the n-gon and press X and delete face. Select the open edge loop and then press Ctrl F and choose Grid Fill. Increase the offset until the flow of the geometry is going the way you want them to. Select these faces at the top and press Shift D to duplicate it. Press Z to move it up slightly above the surface. This will act as a starting point for our hinge. Extrude the faces twice and move the edges at the top a little bit higher. Add edge loops using the Loop Cut tool in these areas. Press L with your mouse hovered over this area to select the entire isolated part of the mesh, and then move it up. Select this edge loop and then deselect the edges at the top so that we can delete these selected edge loops. Do the same for the other side. Go to the top view and enable X-ray vision. Select the vertices that need to be aligned and scale them down in the y-axis. Select this edge, press X, and choose Dissolve Edges. Select these edges at the top and then move them up slightly using Alt-S. Check if the vertices needs to be aligned in the other views. Now select this face and press ES to scale it down to create an inset. Now extrude inside twice. Now I'm going to start beveling and scaling to refine the shape a bit more. Press L to select this part again. We want to duplicate it and flip it to the other side. So what we're going to do is press Shift D, and press S, Y, and then -1. This will flip it in the Y-axis. But notice that it just flipped in place. This is because our pivot point is right now set to median point. We're going to have to move it to the other side. But there's an easier way to do this. For now, I'm going to delete these copied parts. What I want to do is set the cursor as my pivot point, but my cursor right now is not in the middle of our lamp. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the side view and make sure that the pivot point or the cursor is at the center of our lamp. I'm going to pick an object that has a center in the center of our lamp. This top portion has its center in the center of the lamp, so this will be a good one. I'm going to select the object, press Shift S, and use cursor to select it. This will move the cursor to the center of the object. Now I can use the 3D cursor as my pivot point for flipping this part. I'm going to go back to edit mode. Now set my pivot point to 3D cursor, and then press Shift D, S, Y, and then -1. This will flip it to the other side. Now I'm going to move it back down and edit the vertices so that it's shorter. Now I'm going to change the position of my 3D cursor by hitting Shift right click inside this area. This now means that anything that I create will have its center exactly where the 3D cursor is. I'm going to create a circle and lower the number of vertices down to 8. I'm going to rotate the circle by pressing R and then X for the X-axis, and then 90 to rotate it to the side. I'm going to scale it down to fit the socket that we have here. Now it's just a matter of extruding, filling open areas with grid fill, adding edge loops where needed, and applying the subdivision surface modifier. I also did the same thing that I did for the socket and duplicated it to the other side. I also went back out to object mode and clicked Object, Set Origin, and Origin to Center of Mass Surface to make sure that the origin or center of my object is exactly where it's supposed to be. The next thing we're going to do is check for any issues in our geometry that might cause us problems down the line. So go to Overlays and click Face Orientation. This will show us the faces that are flipped. This is what happens when you duplicate an object and flip it to the other side. In order to fix this, select the part of the mesh that is flipped and then press Shift N to flip it back. Do the same for the other side of the socket. Now we have a clean mesh. The next thing we're going to do is select a part of this object as a starting point for our handle. Go to Edit Mode Select the faces that we need, and then Shift D to duplicate it and then scale it out. Now we're going to separate this into a different object. Right-click on the faces, select Separate, and then Selection. Or you can press P. This will now be separated into a different object. Let's rename this Handle. The next step involves extrusion, beveling, and scaling to get the shape that I want. Now that I have the shape, I'm going to copy and flip it to the other side and fix the face orientation. Now select these two opposing edges and press F to bridge. Select one of the new edges and press F until the area is closed. Push these edges out using Alt-S to give it a more rounder look. Then I'll continue tweaking the rest of the model. Now I'm going to go to X-ray mode and select these vertices at the bottom. Now turn on the proportional editing button at the top here. What this lets you do is it lets you move, scale, and rotate your components, and it lets you affect the neighboring components along with your transformation. You can adjust the area of influence by scrolling up or down. I'm going to scale in the y-axis, and then I'm going to make further adjustments to the rest of this part while proportional editing is still turned on. Next, I'm going to add more edge loops to this part so that it will retain its shape much better when subdivided. I'm going to continue tweaking the model by moving and scaling vertices and edges. The next part involves methods that I've already shown before, so I'm just going to play it as a time lapse. To copy this part to all four corners, go to Edit Mode and press A to select everything. Now click on the Z-axis to go to the bottom view, set 3D cursor as our pivot point, and then press Shift-D, R for rotate, and then Z for the Z-axis, and then type in 90. This will make a copy at exactly the 90-degree angle. After that, just press Shift-R twice to make 2 more copies. Now I want to move this to the middle here, so I'm going to rotate it in the Z-axis at a 45-degree angle. The next thing we're going to do is create the metalwork for our lamp. Creating intricate details on a polygonal surface can be time-consuming and quite intimidating. So what we're going to do is use the curve modeling instead so that it would be much easier for us. First, let's take a look at what curves are. Let's create a curve. Shift-A, curve. For this one, we're going to use a Bezier curve. We can't see it on the viewport right now because it's in the center, so we'll move it aside just a little bit. Press G and Y. This is the Bezier curve that we created. Just like a polygonal surface, it has an edit mode. So while this is selected, let's press Tab. Notice that instead of an edge, we have a spline here that is being generated between 2 vertices. And our vertices have 2 handles that are dictating the rotation of the vertex. If we click on one vertex, we are able to manipulate the rotation of this vertex. So right now, our pivot point is set at the 3D cursor. So we're going to have to change it back to the median point. So press R, and now, as you rotate the vertex, the handles also rotate. And in turn, the curvature of the spline will change. On the other hand, you can also grab one of these handles and move them around. You can determine the length of one handle to be different from the other. Same with the other side. This way, you can determine the direction of that curve. Do the same thing for the other side. You can even scale a vertex, and the handles will scale along with it, and so does the curvature of the spline. You can also extrude a vertex to create a continuation of that spline, and then rotate it to have a continuous curvature. This way you can create curvature very easily. But keep in mind that you're going to have to check your curves in different angles and correct them if they are going in the wrong direction. So now that we have a basic idea of how curves behave, we can go ahead and create the metalwork for our lamp. I'm going to go ahead to Object Mode, delete this curve, and create another one. For this one, I'm going to go ahead to the side view. But first, I'm going to create Curve Bezier, and then go to Edit Mode, and delete those 2 vertices that I already have. X vertices, and then go to this side view, which is the x-axis. Now I'm going to start creating the Bezier curve for my metalwork. In the toolbar here, I have a tool called Draw, and this one lets you draw on the viewport to create your curve. I'm going to click on it and try to create the metalwork design that I'm going for. You don't need to be very accurate with your drawing because you can edit it out later. I'm going to go back to selection and I'm going to start rotating my vertices. I'm going to start editing it to the shape that I need. I can extrude to add another vertex at the tip and then rotate it and scale it down. This way, I can make it curve in like so. I'm going to extrude at the bottom part here. And adjust the vertices accordingly. I'm also going to adjust the handles for each vertex so that I have a good amount of curvature in those splines. Alright, so now that we have our curve done, it's time to place it where we need it. I'm going to place it right beside one of the corners of our frame here. I'm going to shape it again to fit that area. Now I'm going to add some thickness to this. So it's okay to have some gaps between the curve and the surface. I'm going to select all the vertices and check in the front view if it is exactly in the middle of that corner. So now that we've created our curve, we can go to our curve settings here, go to geometry, and increase the depth. We can now add thickness to our curve. Now that we can see the thickness of our curve, we can go ahead and adjust it a little bit more to create the shape that we want. All right, so our curve has the same thickness all throughout. So we're going to change that. Select the vertices at the tips. And press Alt-S to scale them up or scale them down. I'm also going to add some thickness in certain areas.
To create another vertex between two vertices, select the two vertices that are connected to each other, and then right-click, subdivide. You will have another vertex in the middle, which you can now manipulate. Alright, now that we have the shape that we need, it's time to add details to this curve. And you can do that by creating a custom profile. Go to Profile here, and scrolling down, you will see that this is the profile that we have currently by default. This will make the tube kind of surface that we had earlier into this rectangular kind of shape. If we adjust and add vertices here, we will be able to change the way that surface is behaving. And you can change this to any type of design that you want. To see this much better, turn off our overlays. So I'm going to create my profile here in this way, and feel free to experiment with your own designs until you get the kind of detail that you're looking for. Alright, so now that I got the shape that I want, I can then go ahead and duplicate this metalwork to the other corners of our frame. I'm going to turn back the overlays. So I'm going to press A to select all the vertices, and then I'm going to make sure that my pivot point will be at the 3D cursor, because the 3D cursor here is at the middle of our lamp. So now I'm going to go ahead and press Shift D, R for rotate, and then Z for the Z axis. And I'm going to go ahead and rotate it 90 degrees. Press 90 and then hit enter. So now it is copied exactly where I want it to be, on that corner of the frame. So now that we've copied one, we can repeat the process by pressing Shift R to do the same thing and copy it 90 degrees in the Z axis again, and then Shift R again to complete it. So now we have all four sides with our metalwork. Let's exit our edit mode. The last thing that we're going to do is create the intricate details for our lamp, and we're still going to use curves for that.